An economist says that the U.S. benefits at least as much from trade with Canada as Canada benefits. Jim Stanford at the Center for Future Work says that claims made by Donald Trump that the bilateral merchandise trade deficit constitutes a subsidy are false. Mr. Stanford says that Canada is the world's largest market for U.S. exports and that the United States also enjoys a large surplus in services trade with Canada. He joined us this morning for more on Donald Trump's subsidy claim.
Well, there's two big problems with Mr. Trump's argument. First, he's making up numbers about how big the so-called trade deficit is. Now, Canada and the U.S., first of all, have a huge amount of trade that goes both ways, about $1 trillion a year in total. And there is an advantage in that Canada sells a bit more in America than America sells in Canada. So that's a trade surplus bilaterally for Canada and a trade deficit for the U.S. In 2023, that imbalance was about $40 billion US, so a very small share of the $1 trillion two-way flow. But Mr. Trump has been just throwing numbers out, calling it a $200 billion deficit. So his numbers are invented, basically. Part of that is because he's excluding trade in services. He's only focusing on merchandise trade, tangible products that come in, whether it's by pipeline or truck or container ship. And he ignores services trade, which is a very large and rapidly growing part of international trade. And by the way, the area where the U.S. has the strongest advantage. So it's cherry picking for him to only look at merchandise, exclude services. But even then, his numbers aren't supported. So first of all, the deficit isn't as big as he says. Secondly, the bilateral trade deficit in no way can be considered a subsidy. In essence, the U.S. is consuming more than they produce. That's what a trade deficit means in aggregate. And America has had a trade deficit every year for the last 50 years. This isn't new, and it isn't even big. It's actually shrunk in recent years, and certainly can't be considered an emergency. And if anything, the rest of the world is subsidizing America through capital inflows in order to allow America to keep consuming more than they produce. And Canada does that too. We lend lots of money to America, yet despite that, we pay net interest and profit income to America. So it's a very strange situation, and in no way is this a charity case where America is bailing out Canada. If anything, we are subsidizing the Americans. In America's case, Canada is their biggest export market. They sell more goods and services in Canada than any other country, far more than China or Mexico or Europe. So all those companies that sell about, close to $500 billion a year in Canada are going to lose business. That's one problem. Secondly, most of what America buys from Canada is not finished products, consumer goods that you see on the shelves, at Walmart or wherever. They are inputs or raw materials or supplies or industrial products that are then used by U.S. businesses in their own production. And so if you put a tariff on or you block off the trade, those U.S. businesses won't have those inputs anymore. So you're actually hurting American businesses. That's how it's quite different than putting a tariff on something that comes from China, where it's more likely to be a finished product. There you could say, okay, you're creating some space for the American firms to move into that market. In Canada's case, all you're doing is penalizing the American firms that use our stuff. So there's no doubt that America in aggregate would be hurt as much as Canada, possibly more, because of the strategic importance of what they buy from us. Oil, for example, Canada is the largest supplier. We supply over half of America's oil imports. But remember, the U.S. is much bigger than Canada, 9 times the population and roughly 10 times the size economically. So that equal amount of pain divided across a larger country won't be felt as severely as it would be in Canada. So both sides would be hurt. But in Canada, proportionately, because we are so dependent on exports, and particularly exports to the U.S., we would feel the pain more than the Americans would in aggregate.